The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested.
The port of Hayfa was large but shallow. Even with most of the sunken buildings cleared away, it was difficult for large vessels to get to one of the 3 docks equipped to handle them. In a city where unsavory characters from half a world away had their guns cocked and ready to shoot at whoever looked funniest, a ship that got stuck could ignite a powder keg. Coraline had her work cut out with this particularly heavy liner. It was running completely blind, relying entirely on the meager sensor array of her little skiff. A sensor array that was older than the turning, and liked to give out false readings as often as it needed a reboot. The one thing that Coraline could rely on was her own sense of the bay, the intuitive knowledge she had cultivated over years of guiding ships through the port. She knew the depth of every spot, the hazards that could cut a cargo liner's belly open. With the electric motor, her skiff could weave between the larger vessels, crowding the waters. The same could not be said about the languid titan behind her. The helmsman sounded drunk. He slurred his speech, making his Crimean accent even more difficult to understand. More than once she had to bolt forward quickly because he hadn't slowed down the sluggish cargo liner when she told him to. She had to scan the port bed, calculate the passage, navigate her skiff, fend off other ships, and deal with the idiot helmsman all at the same time. The trimaran with a gargling petroleum motor almost clipped her as it sped past. The speed limits set by the monks were never enforced. Coraline did not have time to be angry. A trawler was pushing ahead at a path perpendicular to her own. With how slowly it was moving, a child could have seen that it would be crushed by the cargo liner's prow. Clenching her jaw, Coraline grabbed the megaphone. "Stay the fuck back," she warned. Over the cacophony of motors, shouts, music, and the occasional gunfire of the port, this was the only way she could make herself heard. A group of men with rifles leaned over the trawler's railing, gesticulating for her to slow down instead. "Do you not see this monstrosity behind me? Stay the fuck back!" She waved around her flare gun. In a place where everyone was armed, pointing a firearm was generally a bad idea. The bright crimson casing of the flare gun, however, carried authority. She was not just some bitch with a boat. She was a porter. One of the men raised his arms defensively and shouted something up into the pilot house. He knew that, if she fired up a signal, his crew would be in deep shit with the monks. The trawler came to a halt, then reversed a lot more slowly than Coraline would have liked. She accelerated, cutting through a pack of jet skis to get a better vantage point. "Remain slow, do not push," she instructed the helmsman of the cargo liner over the radio, just in case he got any ideas when he saw her dart ahead. It was a bad spot. The gap between the cargo liner and the port bed must have been a mere few hands. If they slowed down too much, they might scrape over some piece of debris sticking out. Even if they didn't, it might happen. She balanced her skiff against the combined wakes of the trawler and the cargo ship, always looking out that nobody ran aground. It was a tight fit. For half a minute, either of the 2 ships could have boarded the other to settle the right of way with fists, blades, and guns. She'd seen it happen more than once. But the liner made it through, and Coraline guided it into the dock without another incident. That had been a close call. She parked her skiff and stepped off to collect her pay. Several members of the Gopik Vor stood with a group of freelance stevedores, ready to unload the ship. Their black uniforms with white stripes were as recognizable as their ancient assault rifles. Before she could get the head Vor's attention, the helmsman of the cargo liner was climbing down the side of the ship, a pistol in hand. He was indeed quite drunk, and shouting in Crimean as he pointed his weapon in her direction. This must have been his first time in Hayfa. His colleagues tried to calm him down, urging him to lower his weapon. The drunk helmsman did not listen. He hurled what was presumably a slew of insults at Coraline, skipping the last few steps of the ladder and jumping straight on the pavement. She stepped back and raised her arms. She was not trying to pick a fight. When the helmsman had taken 2 steps on Hyphen soil, he died. Like divine judgment, the bullet of a sniper cracked open his skull. His face was a mask of surprise when he hit the concrete. On a nearby rooftop, a man holding a sniper rifle waved an ultramarine flag back and forth. His robes had the same color. The Gopik Vor were shaking their heads, shrugging or scratching their brow. Their leader put down his own rifle and signaled to the monk that they had no intention of continuing whatever conflict had been happening here. "Very sorry about that. What a fool," he said when he handed Coraline her fee. 100 shekels, plus another 100 as a tip. "The people they sent from the motherland, they don't understand how we do things here." "Let's hope they learned something from this," said Coraline, pointing at the crew of the cargo liner leaning over the railing. All of them had murder in their eyes. The head Vor laughed, shooing her away. "Go now. We have unloading to do. Legitimate wares only." Back on her skiff, Coraline switched her radio to the porter channel. "I'm in port. Anybody need out?" The port below was still bustling with activity when Coraline enjoyed her evening meal. Olive oil fried mackerel, a starchy potato cake, hummus with copious amounts of garlic, and a cup of lime peppermint tea. A barbed wire net around the balcony kept the screamer gulls at bay. Back when she was a child, they would sit on the balustrade, clacking their sharp teeth, screeching so loud it would hurt her ears. They had since learned that such behavior was rewarded with shots from her uncle's rifle. Gunfire erupted in the distance. An explosion visibly shook a small high-rise, but it did not collapse. Coraline wondered if the Order of the Saviour's Cross had finally found the Nubian pirate king they were hunting. Or maybe it was the Gurion Knights raiding convoys of the Kakano cartel again. The Blue Star Guild had recently been trying to assert hegemony over that particular part of town. It was possible they were driving out the vermin. Hayfa was a city of anarchy. Its position right at the mouth of the Strait of Three Kings made it the primary port of trade between East and West. It connected the Mediterranean with the Sea of Salt and the Kinneret Galil. The sheiks of Sinai enforced strict religious codes as to what could be shipped through the Suez Strait, and the route through Aqaba, though dangerous, was often cheaper for those who were transporting illicit goods. Many had tried to take Hayfa over the centuries, but its strategic position had allowed the monks to keep it ever since the turning. It was their holy land, and though they accepted anyone who wanted to do business here, there was one rule: no violence in places of trade. The result was a city of misfits, always at war with itself under the golden dome of the new shrine. Uncle Gufart brought a serving of fried tomatoes with pepper and pistachios to her table. As a child, she'd thought that he had stopped the turning. According to the monks, it had been he of Nazareth who heard their prayers and stopped the tides from rising further. Her uncle had been from the island of Nazareth. It had seemed like an obvious deduction. When he had explained that he of Nazareth was actually the same Saviour that the Catholics worshipped, and he had lived many thousands of years ago, and that Nazareth itself was not in fact some distant land, but an island barely an hour away by boat, her view of the world had collapsed. "Oh, please, uncle, I'm not that hungry," she smiled at the old man. "No, take it, on the house. I was told you had a run-in with the Crimeans. Nobody should have to deal with people from the far north." "Let me guess, you've met them all?" "Not quite, but many. I used to sail the waters north of Crimea, you know. Everyone up there is useless. They drink all day and do not care about anything." She knew all his stories, of course. Before Uncle Gafart married her aunt and opened this restaurant, he'd been a cook on various ships of the Nordic Shipping Consortium. They, too, maintained offices in Hayfa. "Have you considered the offer?" Gafart asked. "Please, uncle, I don't want to leave Hayfa, and I don't want to betray the trust of the monks." "You wouldn't be. There's a lot of world to see out there, many adventures to be had. Your skills are wasted guiding criminals through the harbor. NSC would take you on in a heartbeat." He hovered at her table, as he so often did. "You've been to the world, uncle. You did all the adventuring that can be done out there. There's none left for me." Gufart shook his head. "The city's no place to live for a woman of your talents." "I grew up here. This place is my life. You just hate Hayfa. You always have." "I love your aunt," Gufart deflected. It was going to be another one of those meals. Late that night, in her fifth-floor apartment, Coraline was woken by the staccato of hectic knocks on her door. There was only one person who would knock this way, so she did not grab the gun on her nightstand. Still, she did not react, waiting for Talik to do the code she'd taught him. After a few moments, there it was. 3 short, 2 long, 4 short. With a sigh, Coraline got out of bed, put on a nightgown, and let her little brother in. Talik scanned the room in drug-induced paranoia, face twitching, his tattooed hands playing with a knife. "I fucked up, Lynn. I fucked up bad," he mumbled as he beelined for her couch. "Did anybody follow you?" she asked as she locked the door behind him. Talik shook his head vehemently. "Never. But they will find me eventually." "Who'd you piss off this time?" Coraline asked. Her little brother was being dramatic. Chances were most of this was due to Talik having smoked the wrong herb. "The Jews," her brother said, looking at the cracked ceiling tiles. "Weird Jews, brother, and so is a huge part of this city. You're going to have to be a little more specific." "Not just any Jews. The Jews." Talik stared at her, wide-eyed. Coraline stopped. Maybe her brother wasn't exaggerating after all. "Please tell me you didn't steal from the Blue Star Guild." Talik remained silent, gritting his teeth. "Fuck." Coraline raised her arms, disappointed in a way she had not expected to be anymore. The guild was one of the preeminent trade powers in the region. It was not a criminal cartel, but a legitimate business empire. They provided their customers with everything from bricklaying to gardening tools to personal tutoring, and the only thing they cared about was their impeccable reputation. In Hayfa, that meant being open and reliable to customers, and those who might one day become customers, and ruthlessly annihilating all those who did them wrong. "There was this kid. He got in deep with us," Talik began. "Always had shekels to spend. Generous, funny guy. He told me he'd only recently arrived in Hayfa, and he wanted to try everything in the city that God refuses to look at before going back to his life in Jerusalem." "And you trusted him?" "He had money." The scars on Talik's arms and the fact that she hadn't seen or heard from him in weeks told Coraline where much of that money must have gone. "And he was a good person too. Whenever the boys were trying to take advantage of some drunk girls, he would stop them. You know, I always try, but I can't. I'm not strong like you." "Don't tell me your friends killed him because he got in the way of them and an easy lay." Coraline had never approved of the company that Talik kept, but the days when she tried to make him into a productive adult had been over for a long time. Talik shook his head. "He wanted to try heroin. The real good stuff. The powder they get from Far East." He shuddered. "It was laced, bad, and he took way too much. He said he wanted to really experience it once. I couldn't stop him. You know I can't stop anyone from doing anything." Talik's voice was high-pitched and apologetic. Coraline began massaging her temples. Overdose deaths happened every day in Hayfa. Many people came here for the drugs, and it was easy to make mistakes, especially when surrounded by dishonest dealers and guides with a penchant for looting corpses. Talik was neither, but someone who didn't know her little brother like she did would come to a very different conclusion. "His father is an intelligence officer with the Blue Star Guild. He knows who I am. He is after me right now." Talik was shaking. "He's going to torture me, and then he's going to kill me. They might kill you too, and Uncle Gufart, and Auntie Miria. These people do not know mercy." "We need to get you to the monks," Coraline decided. "You didn't do this. This is not your fault. If we can get you to the monks, we'll have time to make our case." "He'll kill me." Talik had not listened to her at all. "Hey!" Caroline grabbed her little brother's jaw. "You're not going to die tonight, And not tomorrow either. I will get you out of this, but you have to work with me." Talik nodded. She could see part of his fear subsiding. His big sister was here now. She would take care of him, like she always did. Part of her resented how easily she'd caved in again, but she couldn't help herself. "Now focus, and let's go to the new shrine." Old people were sitting on the street, sharing late-night tea in silence. A courier darted down the road on a bicycle. A woman screamed in pleasure from one balcony. A different woman screamed in anger from across the street. Someone was always awake in Hayfa. Sleeping was for the well-off, and most people here did not fall into that category. Coraline took her brother by the hand and led him through the streets. There were decisions to be made. Back alleys were unsafe, but would also keep them from being spotted. Friends she knew could help, but nobody wanted to mess with the Blue Star Guild. Sticking to places of trade would protect them, but they were also the first place anyone looked for people on the run. She'd already decided to act fast. She had no idea who Talik was running from, what rank he had in the guild, how much her little brother actually knew about the man, or how well he'd actually known his dead friend. It could have taken hours to get all that out of him, and talking about it in the street would do nothing but draw unwanted attention. Better to move now than to regret not having moved later. The cables running between two high-rises overhead were so dense they almost blocked out the light pollution. Decades worth of garbage had piled up in pits and on the roadside. Every shadow was the shape of a mugger, every sound that of a knife being drawn. They moved over a plaza with a long-dead fountain, patches of glue still covering the stone where many years ago it had been covered by some metal valuable enough to be looted. A group of horned rats dispersed from a dead junkie they'd been gnawing on, their eyes glowing orange, sensing Coraline's fear, but deciding that she was neither going to steal their meal nor make a particularly easy one herself. A group of burly, dark-skinned men stood at the tram stop. One of them was telling a story in a language she didn't understand, and the others were listening intently. Judging by their attire, they might have been Malagasy or Swazi. Either way, it was safe to assume they were not affiliated with the Blue Star Guild. Coraline covered her face. Talik needed a moment to do the same. She wasn't sure if his slowness of mind was due to being paralyzed by fear or some residue of whatever he'd taken that night. Either way, she hoped it wouldn't get them both killed. The bell rang, and a sleek silver-blue tram rolled silently around the corner. Though the vehicle itself had been manufactured before the turning, modifications had been made. A fortified chancel at the front housed a conductor wearing a tattered uniform. The barrel of a gun stuck out from between the change window and the chip card reader. Conductors enjoyed a similar status as porters, but that didn't mean everyone always played by the rules. The group of men gestured for Coraline and Talik to go ahead, confirming that they were Malagasy, not Swazi. She swiped her chip card twice to pay for 2 fares. The conductor nodded, her bloodshot eyes devoid of all emotion. An elderly lady was sitting in the back with 3 paper bags, all of which might have contained weapons. 2 bald youths, whose gender she could not quite place, looked at the 2 of them apathetically. Their nails were painted blue, and they had dotted lines tattooed across their eyes. Some new subculture she had become too adult to recognize. The Malagasy paid for their fare in cash, then sat down as a group, their entertainer resuming his story. The conductor typed angrily on the diagnostics pad plugged into the tram's autopilot system before the vehicle set in motion. Coraline wondered what people before the turning had done all day, considering everything they'd left behind was automated. She often did. Taking the tram was a calculated risk. This line would take them straight to the new shrine, but also through some of the busiest areas of town. Someone working for the guild in some capacity was likely to come aboard, and if they were unlucky, a bounty had already been placed on Talik's head, in which case they'd know what he looked like. Having his face veiled made him look suspicious, but it was better than being obvious. They sat close enough to the door to bolt, but not close enough to get dragged out. Coraline at the aisle, Talik at the window. "Don't look out. They scan retinas from afar, I heard," she whispered. Talik closed his eyes in response, like a child pretending that anything it wasn't seeing was not happening. The old woman with the bags left 2 stops later. A tired man in a dirty suit hopped on. The youths were joined by 3 friends who looked just like them and started talking. Even their voices were androgynous. The Melagaso got out at a red light district. A group of drunk women who would have likely serviced them for free joined at the next stop. It was at the old university campus that Coraline's heart jumped to her throat. A handsome young man with curly hair and dark eyes came on with his girlfriend, a beautiful blonde. He wore the black and blue uniform of the Blue Star Guild security department. While the woman on his arm laughed at some joke he'd made before they hopped on, his eyes checked everyone on the tram in seconds. He'd come in relaxed, now he was tense. His girl noticed it immediately. Coraline was not sure if he tensed up after looking at Talik or not. He moved to 4 rows away, sitting down across the aisle, facing them. Close enough to get a good look, but far enough away that she could not be sure. The man inspected her and Talik in the usual manner security people were trained to, and Coraline could almost see his mind making sums. He could hit his comm, call for backup. The guild would drag Coraline and Talik out of the tram and shoot them in the street, then pay whatever fine the transportation authority imposed. But if he called his friends and the guy he had pinned was not Talik, he would be a laughingstock. If his call pulled resources away from somewhere else, maybe the place where the actual Talik was, he would be held responsible. On the other hand, if they found out Talik had been on the tram and he had flirted with his girlfriend instead of doing his job, the consequences would be just as severe. The next stop came and went, and the one after that. A group of vagrants who tried begging for their fare were shooed away by the conductor. The old man got off. A group of middle-aged men with the predatory gaze of businessmen high on cocaine boarded, taking a keen interest in the security man's girl. Even though they sat nearby and leered over the young woman, all he did was assess them quickly and professionally, then pull her closer. They would not try anything untoward, he'd decided. His gaze still rested on Talik and Coraline. He said something to his girlfriend. Coraline's stomach dropped. He was about to make the call. They were done for. When the security man simply rested his hand on his thigh instead of going for his phone, unspeakable relief flooded her. It didn't last long. At the next stop, a group of 6 men in identical black and blue uniforms scrutinized the tram from afar. This was it. They were dead. How had he called for reinforcements? It must have been his girlfriend after he spoke to her. Coraline was so busy keeping an eye on him that she'd completely neglected her. She looked over to Talik, but her brother still had his eyes closed. She could see his lips moving underneath the veil on his face. He was praying. The wheels screeched as the tram came to a halt. The Blue Star men took up position right by their exit. Their colleague got up, holding his girl behind him, approaching. The door opened. One of the security men shouted. The one inside smiled, looking at them. A woman pushed through, looking remarkably like the girlfriend, maybe a little older. The Blue Star security man left the tram and joined his friends. There was laughter, hugging, kisses on the cheek. Some other women were standing with the group, just as many as there were men. One of them glanced at Coraline for a second, then passed on back to her husband. The doors closed. The tram was rolling again. Coraline had to suppress a sigh of relief that might have turned into a moan. Talik was still oblivious to the entire situation. Her hands were shaking when the doors opened at the new shrine 3 stops later. The Golden Dome was illuminated against the night sky, a beacon to the universal God the monks worshipped. Their acceptance of all religions as part of a greater truth was one of the factors that had allowed them to thrive in Hayfa, both before and after the turning. People trusted arbiters with a track record of being impartial. Monks with assault carbines stood on the balconies of the temple walls, smiling gently at the foot traffic shuffling in and out of their house of worship even at this hour of the night. Of course, the new shrine was much more than just a place where people went to pray. In the two rings running around the central cupola, hundreds of traders crowded each other out. Compared to the daytime, it was almost spacious. The path through the tents crammed between high walls was almost wide enough that Coraline could spread her arms out, and there were a few stalls that had no customers. The smell of fried octopus hit her nose. The voice of a man advertising his fine collection of weapons was louder than all others, and a colourful assortment of meaningless souvenirs sold by a woman in a Catholic robe caught her eye. Most of all, a feeling of finally being safe settled in her stomach. Whatever happened, so long as they were here, no one would harm them. Not even the Blue Star Guild would antagonize the monks, and the monks would never kick Talik out simply because the guild demanded it. She sat down by a quiet tea shop and ordered 2 cups of oolong. When Talik removed his veil, she could see that he wasn't half as relieved as she was. "What now?" he demanded. Coraline had to swallow her annoyance at his lack of gratitude. "Now we have some time to come up with a plan." A group of monks passed them by, the pistol holsters making their ultramarine robes seem comically narrow at the waist. Even while openly displaying their potential for violence, their faces were friendly and serene. "First of all, you tell me more about this kid who overdosed." Coraline decided that having a fuller picture would help her find a way out. Talik sighed. "He said his name was Amos, but it turns out it's actually Zeev Kaugler, son of Herschel Kaugler." The voice startled Coraline. Talik let out a decidedly unmanly scream. It belonged to a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair who was drawing up a chair to sit at their table. He wasn't wearing a Blue Star uniform, just clothes that were conspicuously unconspicuous. "If you'd been half a minute slower, I would have been able to stop you from coming in. The bounty on your brother's head is substantial. 3 of his friends are already dead." "You people work fast," Coraline said, trying to make it sound casual. The man shook his head. "Not my people, though I do take their money from time to time. I'm the agent. Don't shake my hand, it might be poison." "You disrespect the sanctity of a place of trade?" "No, but it would be naive of you to believe me." The agent smiled. "You're not going to be able to stay in here forever, so the question is, do you have a better offer for me than the Blue Star Guild?" "What are they offering?" Coraline asked. "It couldn't hurt." "If I told you, you'd try to lowball me." The server set down a cup of pomegranate tea in front of the agent. The fact that she knew him gave him some credibility. Keeping an eye on targets in places of trade was a common enough profession. If push comes to shove, Talik can still become a monk. She came up with the idea as she said it. She didn't even have to look at her brother to know he didn't like it. "And you?" "There isn't a bounty on my head." The agent laughed. "Sometimes I forget you porters believe that you can't get dragged into the petty struggles of this city. You helped the poor kid. One call from me and you're as stuck as he is, except you can't become a monk. I might even be able to collect both of your bounties." "You'd really do that, wouldn't you?" Coraline met people like him every day. Usually her status gave her leverage over them, but she had often dreaded a situation where the shark was sitting at the heavier end of the scale. "Of course I would. I don't care about people, I care about profit. Which is good for you because it means you still get access to my services, provided you can pay." The agent sipped his tea. "I'll give you a hint. Blue Star is offering a lot. Unless porters have more money than gigantic business syndicates, I expect to be collecting my payday from them." The solution fell into place in Coraline's mind. Before the train of thought had even finished, she hated it with a passion. Still, it was the only option she had left. "You know what? I think I just might be able to drum up that kind of money." The agent frowned in surprise, but the smile on his lips was curious. If he'd been rooting for her to come up with something, it had only been for his personal entertainment. Coraline pulled out her phone. Even as it stood, her plan was a gamble. It relied on a lot of factors being just right, as they might, but also might not be. The first was a certain cook not shutting off his phone when he went to sleep. It rang for 5 agonizing seconds. Then, a breathy voice whispering, Coraline? Shouldn't you be asleep? Uncle Gafat, I really need your help. 2 hours later, a sleep-deprived Gafat and a representative of the Nordic Shipping Consortium was sitting at the table with Talig, Coraline, and the agent. You realize you'd both be signing on for 40-year contracts? The representative asked. She was a middle-aged woman with a stern face and the big nose. If that's the only option, they will have to take it, Gafat declared. Whether he was happy that Coraline was signing on with NSC, or if the circumstances put a damper on that, she could not tell. I'd like to hear it from her, the representative gestured over to Coraline. I do realize that, yes. I also realize that my pay will be docked significantly. That shouldn't be much of a problem for you. From your headhunting file, I gather that you are highly intelligent and your skill set is more than just impressive. With some training, we could place you in any role within the organization and you'd excel in that position. The representative looked to Talig. You, on the other hand, will probably be scrubbing decks for next to nothing for the rest of your life. I'm sure that's not how you saw things going. Before Talig could say anything, Coraline interjected, It's better than being dead. She couldn't have her little brother realize that his life had just been taken away from him by cosmic irony. He'd done a lot of things wrong, yet the thing that would take it all away was arguably something he wasn't responsible for. She was trying to hold off on that realization herself. It's settled, then. If you'll sign your respective contracts, you will be walking out here with me, and your brother will be smuggled out by the agent, with NSC covering all immediate fees. She pushed data tablets in front of both of them. What if he decides to make double money and sells me to the guild anyway? Talig sounded rightfully terrified at the notion of entrusting his life to the shark at the table. Don't worry, I have a reputation to uphold, the agent said, grinning. We've worked with him in the past. Money makes him reliable, the representative reassured. Now that this is settled, I'd like to take you back to corporate and actually test your skills. Gentlemen? The representative rose, then looked at Coraline. Someone will liquidate your assets for you. We take care of our own. What about my skiff? It was probably hilarious to some demon or deity that the one thing she really cared about was that tiny little boat. Then again, it was the most expensive thing she owned. You won't need it anymore. Welcome to your new life, Coraline. I hope the NSC family will enjoy working with you.
If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.